for the participants from NCAPDA, which is the National Coalition Against Prescription Drug Abuse. April Rivera was a Cal High parent. She's joined us in the past year, so this is her foundation, and we're really excited to have you with us today, so welcome.
Thank you, and along with me today I have Ankita, who is going to be giving part of the presentation. She is one of our interns and attends Dublin High School. Nick is with us also, and Nick is one of the members of our public speaking organization, our group that basically goes out and provides education, sometimes providing the entire presentation, otherwise participating in it as Nick is doing today. So he's part of our Speakers Bureau. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen and sharing the PowerPoint presentation we normally provide in the classroom environment. And so let me go over to the slideshow and from the beginning. So I'm assuming everybody can see this. So in starting this, I want to just say that I'm not here today to tell you that prescription drugs are horrible, they're bad, and we should never use them. That's quite the opposite. They literally can save lives. And that being said, there's a really positive side to prescription drugs when used correctly, but there can also be quite a very dangerous problem with them if we don't do that, if we use them recreationally, if we use too many of them, if we mix them incorrectly with other drugs. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. There is an epidemic of prescription drug abuse and misuse in our country, and unfortunately, I and my family suffered a horrible outcome as a result of our son Joey going down a path where he used prescription meds that he'd been prescribed along with alcohol while he was out with his friends. This is my son Joey, and you'll notice up in the top right, the photo there showing that he's, you know, basically a football player. This was at Cal High. Joey graduated in 2006 from Cal High, and you know, he sat in those chairs that you sit at when you're in your classrooms, you know, earlier this year. And he, I remember he had certainly health and all the different subjects that you guys are taking, no doubt, too. And so I will tell you that the loss of our son, and he did pass away as a senior attending Arizona State University, has just been a life-changing event for our family. It's been devastating. It is something that we continue to deal with every single day. You know, you don't lose a son and a brother and a cousin and other, you know, a friend even, and not have it be impactful. And it's something that will be that for the rest of our lives. So I want to go to the next slide, which is going to be actually a video, if we can get it to move. And of course, I'm having my first technical issue. Okay, so I'm going to play this short video that will share more about what happened to Joey.
Hello, I'm April Rovero. I would like to introduce you to my son, Joseph John Rovero III, fondly known as Joey. Joey was born on March 9th, 1988, into a family that simply couldn't wait for him to arrive. Despite the 14-year age difference between Joey and his older brother, the two grew very close during the years, and his dad and I simply adored him from the moment he was born. Joey loved sports right from the start, and he was highly competitive. While soccer was his primary sport through 7th grade, football became his passion, and he was a starter throughout his high school football career. Our family loves the outdoors, and Joey's dad and I have great memories of the vacations we took with Joey in Alaska, the Canadian Rockies, and various other national parks. Joey was a good student, and I would say his favorite subjects were history and English. He was extremely creative, and we were constantly amazed by the creative art, video, and writing projects he shared with us. Joey was an extremely popular young man. He had such an engaging personality, and he lit up every room he entered. Joey loved to laugh, and he was known for his jokes, daring spirit, and huge hugs. He was also non-judgmental and caring, and many considered him their best friend. Joey began attending Arizona State University the fall after high school graduation. He had no problem adapting to college life. He joined a fraternity and had tons of new friends by the end of his first semester. Joey was looking forward to graduation and starting a new career in just 5 months when tragedy struck. On December 18th, 2009, Joey died from an accidental overdose of prescribed medications he had mixed with alcohol during a college party. Instead of returning home for Christmas, Joey arrived from Arizona in a casket. We buried him the day after Christmas, with hundreds of his family and friends mourning his loss. The death of our beautiful son has completely shattered the lives of everyone who knew him. Knowing Joey's death was completely avoidable has made it that much harder for us to deal with. Hello.
So the word impact, as we put together this educational presentation, just always comes back to me as just really profound. And, you know, what I've taken away from what happened to Joey is so many things. You know, one of them, of course, is the educational process that I've gone through, you know, trying to learn as much as I could about prescription drugs, because back in that time frame while Joey was in high school and, you know, in college, I really had no idea that these drugs could be used recreational, the ones we're going to talk about anyway that are narcotics. But I just also didn't have any idea how dangerous they could be. Joey died from basically a single pill of oxycodone. I would say a pill and a half of oxycodone, which is a painkiller, a pretty strong painkiller, along with the pill of Xanax. And he had been drinking the night that he passed away with his friends, but his alcohol level was really just above the level that you should be driving with. So, you know, he was legally drunk, but not drop dead drunk by any means. I couldn't believe it when 4.5 months after he passed away, we got, you know, the coroner's report that let us know how little it had taken to kill him. He was healthy, he was young, and there would have been just no way he would ever have thought that night that he took the medications that he had been prescribed, that he would have passed away. You know, the reality was, and this gets us into this next slide, he was living with his 2 roommates who were fraternity brothers of his. And what I came to learn after he passed away was that these 2 roommates, John in the middle and Sam on the right side of the photo, had developed a really strong prescription drug problem. They had grown an addiction to those medications, including Xanax and painkillers. And I like to include this particular photo in this presentation because the reality is, even when you take your medications as prescribed, painkillers and benzodiazepines or sedatives, and even some of the stimulants we'll talk about, you can grow a substance use disorder. You can develop an addiction to them. And, you know, you don't necessarily see it coming. So that's why it's so important to understand the dynamics of these medications, how strong they are, how powerful they are, and how important it is to be very careful about taking them. So in this case, John, I think it's really important to talk about what medical situation he had that led to his addiction. After John passed away 9 months after Joey died, and that happened, he shot and killed himself in front of his girlfriend, which was the second most devastating day of my personal life. I talked to his mother and actually went to visit her where she lived in Tampa, Florida. And what she told me was that John had probably since his teen years, a mental health disorder, which was bipolar. And he didn't really go down the legitimate health treatment path. He just really wouldn't go down that path with her. And she tried to get him into treatment, et cetera. But, his story was basically self-medicating, using Xanax. Initially, he used marijuana, I was told. And then he migrated over to Xanax to kind of, balance out his, his mental health disorder. And then, prescription painkillers came into the mix because that was kind of within the party scene at ASU. I came to learn also afterwards. And so, by the time he passed away, he was really a chemical mess. He was addicted to Xanax. He had a problem with painkillers. Alcohol was always in the mix. And, that really, along with all the different things like the loss of Joey and some other personal issues, ultimately drove him to suicide. In the case of Sam over on the right, Sam was actually a graduate of De La Salle High School over in our area in Walnut Creek. And he played sports there. And this is another way that we see often people end up not totally unexpectedly becoming addicted to painkillers in particular. So Sam got injured playing sports at De La Salle and ultimately became addicted to painkillers. And he had a problem even going off to college. So Sam is still with us, thankfully, but he's lost his two really good friends and roommates and fraternity brothers. And I'm sure that's going to haunt him for the rest of his life also. So I just want to say that we have a national epidemic again with prescription drug abuse and misuse. And this slide here basically just shows kind of the national data look as of 2018. People were actually celebrating the fact that we only had 68,557 people recorded as having died from prescription drug overdoses, or just drug overdoses, I really should say, in that year, because the year before it had been over 70,000. So there was a reduction, and those of us who are working strongly in our communities to try to reduce, the overdose deaths in particular, were really happy to hear that. But I have to say, 68,000 people is just an enormous number of people still. It's more than died in the Vietnam War. And this is just 1 year of statistics. And then I want to make a special comment that a lot of those overdoses were a direct result of opioids. Opioids, whether they be in prescribed form like painkillers or otherwise illegal forms of opioids like heroin and fentanyl that we see out there all the time in all of our communities, was attributed to the cause of most of those, the majority of those deaths. And it continues to be, the problem that we're seeing out there in a big way. So you may have even heard of our opioid epidemic, and that's what this is about. And then as you can see, the highest rate of non-medical use, meaning the abuse or recreational use of these medications, is between young adults ages 18 to 25. All of you have probably heard, over time about, kind of the high profile stars, whether they're musicians or they're actors or whatever, dying. And, they happen often. We're seeing, we still see them. This doesn't even reflect the most current of them. But I will tell you that, the problem is here. It's not just it's happening to the rich people or, people that, you have to wonder how in the world it would happen to because they have everything in the world going for them, right? But here is a look at our own San Ramon Valley and the overdose deaths that we've seen here between the dates, the years 2010 and 18. Now, each one of these represents a family like mine that is left devastated, whether it's a parent or a child. It really doesn't matter. A precious member of our local families have been affected 29 times minimally. And then the second note that I want to share with you is this does not include at least 14 other young adults who died outside of our Contra Costa County. So they don't even get included in the statistics. So add 14 people minimally to, the 29 that you see here. And that is what the real impact is. Young people leaving our area, going off to college or, to live their more adult lives, and they just aren't making it. So it's just so imperative that education start young. I mean, you guys are in high school, and that's important for you to get this information, but I want to make sure that, younger people, even in middle school, really understand this, because sometimes, because it's not uncommon for people to start abusing substances between the ages of 12 and 14, middle school years, by the time they get to high school, it's too late. They're already abusing things and they get themselves into big trouble. By then they could actually have, an addiction forming or, in pretty, solid shape. So here's the face of what we're seeing. I have about 700 photos now from people around the country that have shared their loved one with me and asked me to use their photo to help get the word out about, what's happening in this world of prescription drug, abuse, and especially heroin abuse and illegal opioid. So every one of these, again, is a story. Two of the people on this, and normally in a classroom, I would point to the people that I'm speaking of right now, but two of these are San Ramon Valley. They went to San Ramon Valley high schools, one Monte Vista High and another one San Ramon Valley High. And, I have two sets of brothers here. Now I know of families in our country that have lost three kids in their family, or say a parent and a child. So it's just really devastating. So it's personal to me, and it should be personal to you because it's impacting us right here in our own backyard. So then looking at the community impact in general, again, we've already talked about, the overdose deaths, but where you have drug usage and, people desperate to find stuff to sell that they can use to buy the drugs that they're addicted to, you see crime levels. So I bet there's several of you, in the classroom here that have been impacted maybe with a car break-in or maybe even a home burglary. I can certainly raise my hand in both of those cases. The home burglary happened many, many years ago down in Southern California where I lived, but my car's been broken into. I've had multiple cars broken into, in fact, despite my best efforts, So we need to be mindful that even if you don't have someone in your family that has a drug problem or, whatever, you can still be impacted either with crime levels like this or otherwise with drug driving and the injuries that can happen to any of us just driving around town, and ending up in an accident with somebody that is under the influence of drugs or alcohol of any sort. We also have a number of families in our community, I know many of them, who are struggling with addiction, the substance use disorder. That can be alcohol, it can be tobacco, it can be virtually anything, but it can absolutely be from prescription drugs. And then of course, the financial cost to our, our nation is just astronomical, trying to deal with the legal aspects, et cetera, of, the problem and treatment. We also need to be aware that there are legal risks, to using these drugs and, using them inappropriately. If you do end up, involved in a crime that's related to your drug usage, then you may be caught with pills that you don't have a prescription for. You can see the potential legal risk there. If you're furnishing or selling your medications to somebody else, say you have painkillers that one of your friends, wants to get from you because maybe they want to try it or maybe they're already hooked on painkillers. That's not something you want to do. There's a legal potential risk there, especially if something happens to them and they trace that drug back to you. And of course, driving under the influence of prescription drugs or any kind of drugs is no different than driving under the influence of alcohol. And you can see what the potential legal risk is there. Additionally, we can have personal risks. So those that use drugs often are sharing needles, they're sharing paraphernalia of whatever sort. Maybe it's just a straw they're using to snort a drug or whatever. And anytime you're coming into contact with bodily fluids or, bits and particles of, somebody else's body, you're going to potentially have one of these health issues develop, HIV and AIDS, are absolutely out there. So is hepatitis B and C. And then of course, you're certainly at risk the more you use in developing a substance use disorder, also known as addiction. So who can develop a substance use disorder? Pretty much anybody. It can be good students that, you know, you get injured, you take your medications as prescribed or not, or maybe you take them longer than you should and you become dependent and potentially addicted to them. It can be athletes, especially who have a sports injury, or otherwise maybe just want to get an edge on the field and maybe they're taking a stimulant to give them extra energy or whatever. It can be certainly, as I discussed with you about John, it could be those with mental health disorders or issues, and maybe you don't even realize that you've got one. You know, maybe it's just you're not always feeling, you know, okay, you're feeling anxious or depressed or whatever. You know, self-medicating happens instead of asking for help, which we all should do if we have that kind of an issue going on. Parents can certainly become addicted. I know lots of parents that have become had addiction problems, and instead of the young person in the family, you know, having to cope and deal with, you know, their own substance use disorder, it's them trying to deal with a parent that's not parenting them properly. It can be grandparents, it can be anybody, really. There is no boundary at all as far as substance use disorder and who it can impact. I'd want to share too that these are really some key risk factors that we need to all be aware of. So if you have a family history of addiction, and that would be to anything, it could be tobacco, alcohol, or whatever, you yourself, the closer that family member is to you genetically, you're at higher risk for developing a substance use disorder, especially if you start really young. You start in middle school or high school, you're more likely going to develop, you know, a problem down path, and that would be because your brain is still under development. Our human brain isn't completely, you know, mature until we're about 25 years old. So as we're introducing these different chemicals from any of these drugs, you know, it can have a devastating impact on our brain development. And that can also result in a substance use disorder. We've already talked about mental health disorders and even childhood traumas and learning disabilities. You know, the self-medication element comes into play with all three of those, you know, trying to deal with whatever trauma or learning disability and you know, feelings of inadequacy or feelings of, you know, just not fitting in or whatever can be a problem. So I want to spend the next little bit of time talking about the specific kinds of drugs that we have to be so careful about using. These are prescription drugs that include our painkillers, our sedatives, and prescription stimulants. So starting with sedatives, this is just a little sampling, there's so many of them out there, but this is a little sampling of the ones that I really want to focus on, and especially Xanax. And Xanax, because I hear often from teachers or school administrators that Xanax is unfortunately prevalent on our campuses. It's kind of the perception about that particular medication is that, yeah, it can chill you out. It's a chill pill. It's meant for acute anxiety. When it's prescribed, it should only be for a short term because the longer you're on Xanax, the more likely you're going to become very dependent on it. And it's a really hard drug to come off of if you develop an addiction to it. If you were to suddenly just stop taking it once your body's become dependent on it, you can actually have lethal seizures. That means you can die from actually stopping taking Xanax without being properly weaned off of it once your body's dependent on it. So we just need to be really, really careful with this. The other one I'd call out is Ambien, because Ambien is also prescribed pretty frequently for people who have insomnia. They can't go to sleep and stay asleep. That particular drug, though, I've heard from many, many people, it doesn't happen always, but with many people, it causes them to have kind of an amnesiac effect. And what that means is that they take the medication, they go to sleep, and then they wake up in the middle of the night and they get up and they do stuff they don't even know or realize they're doing. They might go into the kitchen and fix food, you know, and that's not something you should be doing, cooking with a stove and and all that if you aren't really understanding what you're doing, or they'll go in the garage and maybe start using tools out there, building a project. And I mean, these are real stories that I've been told by, you know, young people that have shared their personal family stories with me. Otherwise, there were 2 cases about 3 years ago where people got in the car under the influence of Ambien and they drove. And they didn't even know they were driving. They ended up having an accident. And in both cases, they killed somebody in that accident. So then, of course, there were the legal, you know, consequences of, you know, having that had happen. You know, despite the fact they were taking their Ambien as prescribed, you know, it still happened, and there were consequences for that. So anyway, sedatives are very, very strong medications. They are addictive, and I just want to make sure that we all understand we should avoid these unless we have an absolute medical need for them. In the case of stimulants, like in the case of sedatives, they calm our bodies down. And I should have mentioned also that they can slow your breathing down, and that's one of the real critical elements of sedatives. But in the case of stimulants, they have the opposite effect. So, and before I move on to share more about this, I want to make sure that you know that if you happen to be taking Adderall or Ritalin because you have been diagnosed as having ADHD, these are not the effects that you would expect to have. These effects would be for those who are abusing the medication. They don't have a legitimate prescription for it, or they've been misdiagnosed because they presented symptoms just to get the drug. That can happen sometimes. It would be for somebody that really does not have ADHD and has no medical purpose for this medication. And so there are times when people take these drugs to stay awake to study. And that could be even good students. They want to keep their A game going, you know. It can be athletic, those that are involved in athletics that, you know, want to take these drugs because they think it'll give them an edge on the playing field, as I kind of mentioned before. But as you can see, there are some real serious potential effects from stimulants and abusing them also. One that isn't shown here that really is probably worth noting is that sometimes when you take enough of this medication and you're drinking alcohol at the same time, you may not feel the effects of alcohol because this stuff is ramping everything up in your body, where the alcohol, you know, is a downer, let's just say, but you're not feeling the down, effects of alcohol. So you drink more than you should, and your body is still being poisoned by that alcohol the more you drink, but you don't realize it. So you could have an adverse effect from the alcohol because of the Adderall or Ritalin or the other stimulants hiding the actual impact of that alcohol. Cough medicine is another medication that you can either get over the counter or you can get as a prescription. So the over-the-counter cough medicine has alcohol in it. And the alcohol, of course, like alcohol does, you can get high from it. You can also become addicted to it. And so it is way more than just, you know, this kind of perceived no problem kind of way to get high. There are a whole lot of different effects. In fact, this is a short list of effects. I actually do know parents that have lost their children from an overdose after becoming addicted to cough medicine. In terms of the stuff that you would get prescribed to you, it actually has codeine in it. And codeine is a painkiller that we're going to be talking about next. So painkillers, also known as opioids, you know, so again, I kind of want to make sure that you know opioids come in 2 forms: in the form of a prescribed painkiller and also as an illegal form of opioids. And that is, you know, in the form of typically heroin, fentanyl, carfentanil, and some other synthetic kinds of opioids. This is just, again, a short list of the painkillers that are out there. There are just a ton of them because they make the pharmaceutical companies a lot of money. You know, a lot of people have pain issues. And so these are very, very much in our, you know, the fabric of our communities and families. I want to call out this in particular, that these drugs, along with sedatives, slow and stop your breathing. That is their really dangerous potential effect. And like Joey, if you combine a painkiller with a sedative, even if it's not a huge amount of either of those 2 drugs, and if you add alcohol, even if it's just painkillers and alcohol, or sedatives and alcohol, or all 3 of them, or painkillers and sedatives. Well, any kind of combination mix, there's a multiplier effect, and each of them would have slowed your breathing down a little bit, but in combination, they can slow it down to the point it stops. And that's exactly what happened to Joey. You know, you go to sleep, you think, you know, I mean, you're just assuming you're going to wake up, and you just don't. It slows your breathing down, it stops it, and you don't wake up. And so these drugs in particular are the most dangerous. Any form of opioid, whether it's a painkiller that's prescribed to you or one that you get off the street from a dealer or a friend, all of them have the same kind of effect, that they can slow and stop your breathing. Those synthetic opioids, so the illegal form of them, fentanyl is on the rise in terms of its availability. It's in our communities. If you were to talk to any police officer who is out on the street helping, you know, take care of our neighborhoods, they will tell you fentanyl is here in our own backyards. San Ramon, Danville, you know, Alamo, and beyond. The reality is fentanyl is so powerful that if you look at the little penny, you know, in the powder form that this comes in, and you can see just a few specks of this fentanyl noted there, that's enough to kill you. It doesn't take much at all. It's 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine, so meaning, you know, pretty much a prescribed painkiller. And it can come in multiple forms. It can be in powder form. And when it's in powder form, it can be sprinkled into pretty much any substance that you would get off the street, like cocaine, like Molly, like methamphetamine, like heroin. It's showing up in pretty much everything. And in those communities where this stuff shows up, say a drug dealer puts together batches of this stuff and starts distributing it, we actually see cluster overdoses. Thankfully, we have not seen that in San Ramon Valley yet, but the most recent one that I'm aware of was down in Monterey County, where that happened. There were just a whole bunch of people over the course of about a week to 2 weeks that died, or otherwise they were saved, and we'll talk about how that could happen next. But it's so scary. They got to the point down in Monterey, they just basically said, don't even take a breath mint from a friend, because you know, it can show up in powder form and all these, it can be sprinkled into stuff. And we're hearing disturbing reports of it even showing up in marijuana that is purchased off the street, you know, just, you know, rather than a dispensary. But it also can come in a fake pill form. So the picture just above the penny shows you that. These pills can look like Norco, a painkiller. They can look like Xanax. They look so real often that even the, you know, law enforcement folks can't really tell the difference. So we certainly can't either. Anything that you would order online, on a pharmacy online, it is, unless you absolutely know that it's a legitimate pharmacy, there are a ton of illegitimate ones. And they're sending out fake pills that include fentanyl often. So it's a really dangerous thing to do. So thankfully, there is an antidote for opioid overdoses, because it does help save lives. And I'm going to just start by the little session that we're going to have that Ankita is going to present about, you know, how can we turn around an overdose? How can we save somebody who's overdosed from an opioid? And this is, I'm going to start that right here. So let me just get this little video going here.
People are dying every day from opioid overdose. Parents and children, friends and neighbors. But naloxone can help. Naloxone is a safe and effective rescue medication that reverses the effects of opioids and saves lives. To understand how naloxone can stop and reverse the effects of an opioid overdose, it's helpful to see how opioids work in the body. Opioids are agonists. This means they bind to and activate specific receptors in the body, including the brain, brainstem, and spinal cord. When these receptors are activated, people experience the effects produced by opioids, such as pain relief, euphoria, calmness, relaxation, and slowed breathing. taking too many opioids causes so many receptors to fill and activate that breathing may become dangerously slow and even stop. This is how an opioid overdose happens, and this is where naloxone can help. Naloxone has a strong affinity to opioid receptors, more so than most prescription opioids and heroin. But unlike opioids, naloxone is an antagonist. This means it attaches to opioid receptors without activating them. So when naloxone is administered during an overdose, it knocks the opioids responsible out of the way and allows breathing to normalize. Naloxone can be administered through an injection or a nasal spray. It usually starts working within a few minutes and lasts from 30 to 90 minutes. While one dose of naloxone can reverse an overdose, sometimes multiple doses are needed, especially in cases involving extremely potent opioids like fentanyl, or opioids that stay in the body longer than naloxone. Naloxone is very safe in single or multiple doses. It may produce withdrawal symptoms in people with opioid dependence, but it has no abuse potential and cannot cause an overdose. It's important to remember that naloxone is opioid-specific. It has no effect on an overdose caused solely by non-opioid substances like benzodiazepines or alcohol. At the same time, people shouldn't be afraid to use naloxone when the cause of an overdose is unknown. If opioids were not involved in an overdose, it won't cause any harm. If opioids were involved, naloxone can save a life.
Okay, so Ankita, I'm going to move to the next slide, and let's see here. We'll go ahead and have you start our training on how to reverse an overdose.
Hi everyone, I'm Ankita. I'm a sophomore at Dublin High School, and I interned for April in the NCAA PDA. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about naloxone. I think the video was a very good introduction to what it is. And like it said, it can be in the form of injection, which you can see in the picture in the middle, or it could be a nasal spray, and that's what Narcan is. So signs of an opioid overdose are loss of consciousness, a breathing or heartbeat that can be slow or stopped, fingernails or lips that can be blue or purplish or black, vomiting if they can't get up or unable to speak, their body is limp and their face can be pale or clammy, or maybe they have choking sounds, or they have a snore-like gurgle. So all of these are definitely signs of an opioid overdose, and in the next couple of slides, we'll be talking about how to kind of take care of that. So if you think that a person has overdosed on an opioid, call 911, and if you tell them as much information as you know, tell them the symptoms, if their breathing has slowed or stopped, and that they're unresponsive. And if you know what drugs they were using, tell the paramedics what those were, and try to give as much information about the location. So you guys may have heard about the Good Samaritan law, but that provides a limited immunity from low-level drug violations. So it basically says if you call 911, you have some immunity from the law. And where that can help you kind of save a life too. So when you have naloxone or the nasal spray Narcan available, you're going to want to spray that into their nostril and then give them CPR, tilt their head back, open mouth, pinch nose. And if that doesn't work and there's no response in 2 to 5 minutes, try to give a second application of the Narcan and then continue to do the rescue breathing until help arrives. There is a certain position that you usually want to keep someone in, which is their bent knee and arm and their hand supports head. And this is kind of a key position for them to help get their breathing back to normal. Some things that are really important to know is that, like the video said, naloxone can last for 30 to 90 minutes. So that means that they may overdose again after it's gone out of effect, depending on how much of the opioids are still in their system. If they can't walk and talk well after the overdose, take them to the ER. And after they wake up, they may be combative and they may want to use it again, but you have to kind of prevent them from doing that so they don't have a second overdose. And the person needs to be monitored for several hours at the ER or by friends or family after an overdose. And something that's really, really important about naloxone is that it can't hurt somebody if they're not overdosing. So when in doubt, use it, because even if the overdose wasn't from an opioid, it's not going to harm their body in any way. So anyone should really be carrying naloxone. It can be a person who has an active addiction in their family, someone who was recently released from a treatment facility, someone who was recently released from jail or prison with an opioid addiction, or someone who's taking high dosage opioids for pain problems. So that can be an athlete who just injured themselves or anyone else. Naloxone, you can get it from a doctor's prescription, from a pharmacy over the counter, recovery clinics, or needle exchange clinics, or www.naloxone free for all. That is going to be free and it would be mailed to you. I'm going to hand it back over to April right now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ankita. So again, if you guys have any questions at all about what was just presented, go ahead and give those questions to us in the chat room. So just moving forward, you know, how do we keep our families, ourselves safe from the effects of medication? As you go to the doctor moving forward with or without your parents, you know, as you turn 18, you'll be on your own, but right now, typically you'd be, you know, sitting there with your parent. But, you know, ask what the side effects of the medication are if the doctor's planning to prescribe to you anything. Ask them if the medication they're going to prescribe is addictive or not. You know, if it is, and they say, yeah, it could be, then you want to ask them what other treatment options there are, particularly if you have a family history of addiction. Maybe they don't know that. But if you're concerned about the possibility, definitely ask these questions. And also, there's actually a new law now that's been in place for about at least a year and a half, that says that if you go in to see a doctor, in the case of opioids, like you have, let's just say a sports injury, you know, and you broke your leg, if they're going to give you an opioid, they are supposed to have a conversation with you about the dangers. There's actually a kind of a fact sheet that they're supposed to have you sign off on along with your parents that shows that you have been counseled about the potential dangers of these medications. You know, what you can do is assess, you know, how your pain levels are going with your injury. You know, do you think that your injury and your pain levels are so much that you really do need, you know, this strong a medication? Would Advil or Motrin or even Tylenol or a combination of those medications over the counter be adequate in managing your pain? If so, you should always do what you can to avoid basically going down this path of the narcotic treatment plan. And then you always want to read and follow the drug labels. So really any medication, even the stuff that you would purchase over the counter, just walk into a drugstore and get, there are always potential side effects. So from this point on, always read the labels, read the, you know, the bottles, the boxes the medication comes in, whether it's prescribed or not. You know, it's really important that we all do that. There are alternative treatment options for both pain and the anxiety and sleep issues that we may have, as you can see here. And so don't feel like there are no other options besides these medications. There truly are. We've got some resources here, and I'll leave this screen up, but I want to invite Nick to come on board now and to share what he can about his lived experience with some of these medications. So Nick, can you take over now?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, April.
You're welcome.
I just saw in chat also, by the way, that Paul asked if the nasal spray is still effective, even if the victim is not breathing.
Yes.
To address that,
Yep.
it is. All it has to do is enter the capillary bed there in the nasal sinus to be absorbed into the bloodstream. So it is still effective. And it's good to know that.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you everybody for being here. the reason why I'm here today is to share my personal experience with addiction. And so these addictive chemicals, these addictive drugs have all kinds of dangers to them, like health-wise, you could lose your life, all kinds of things. But another one that's really important to address is the actual addiction problem. And I guess, like, first I'll just give a quick background about myself, which is that I had a great childhood. I grew up with loving parents and two brothers, no childhood traumas, and in fact, all of those risk factors that April had talked about, I had none of them. So I never would have expected what was going to happen to have happened. But basically, I went through my entire life up until I was about 26, 27, not really knowing the actual full meaning of the word addiction. I mean, like, you know, when I was in high school, like you guys, I thought of that word, and, you know, I thought of like the TV shows and the movies that portrayed an addict who looked like, you know, a sad person who just wanted to do drugs all the time, wanted to feel good all the time. And that's sort of what I thought, because I didn't know anybody that was an addict themselves, and I had no firsthand experience with it. So it was just very vague, not full understanding that I had of that word. And so I don't know if anybody here has like a real grasp of the definition of addiction, but I was going to just let you guys know that it is defined as continue to take in a substance despite it causing negative consequences. So that would mean that someone is still compelled, like compulsively using, despite it's causing bad things to happen. Maybe it doesn't make them feel good anymore, or it's causing them to lose all their money or their job or their home, their friends, all these things that were, you know, very important before the addiction started. And so someone doesn't want to lose those things, especially if the drug is not making them feel good anymore. So it's important to understand that addiction is, which it's actually defined as a disease by the National Institute of Health. It's a disease of choice, where you lose your ability to choose what you're doing and lose the ability to choose how you behave. And it's hard to kind of like really fully grasp what that means, but hopefully I can share my story and you can get a little bit of a better sense of that. And so another thing I wanted to touch on is, like, why do addictive drugs make you feel good? You kind of just take it at face value that, yeah, there are things that make you feel euphoria or calm or get rid of your anxiety. And yeah, obviously those things feel good, but there's a second component to them that's not everybody, and especially myself, thinks about, which is that there's a reward system in the brain, and this causes, you know, this is what's behind our motivation to do most of the things in our lives to help us survive, like to eat. It provides a reward, a pleasure reward when you eat, breathe, you know, rest, get rest, talk with friends, socialize, family, experience love or beauty, all these things in our life that feel good naturally. There's a system in our brain that's like dedicated to making sure that happens. And what addictive chemicals do is they hijack that part of the brain and give you that reward just for taking in the substance. So all of a sudden, you're taking in a drug that is an addictive chemical, and you're getting that same, but probably much more intense feeling of satisfaction or reward that you would get for these normal things. And it doesn't take very long, and it definitely did not for me, for that to climb in priority to basically sacrifice the other things that used to be important to you, until using that drug becomes top. And yeah, so I'll get to my personal story now, just now that I've explained a little bit of background on addiction and what I've learned through my personal experience, which is, so I was 26 and never heard of I'd never had anybody in my life that was an addict or really had a good grasp of what that word meant. And I was coming back from work. I worked at a hospital, and it was a rainy evening. I ended up slipping and grabbing the top of a street sign to like try and brace my fall, and my hand slid across the street sign, and I cut open my hand really bad. It was like a really intense injury. Blood was spraying out every time my heart beat. I had to go to the emergency room, and I had to have surgery because I had cut my nerves, my tendons, and arteries in my hand. And so I had surgery. It was a success, which was great. But the surgeon prescribed me for pain management a bottle of 200, 300 Percocet for the next couple months worth of pain management. They don't do that anymore, but they did. This was like in 2011. They did that. And he said one thing to me, and I really, really don't think this was sufficient for warning about how dangerous addictive chemicals can be. And that was that he said one sentence: "This can be habit forming." So it was very, I mean, that's pretty weak, I would think, in terms of a warning for something this dangerous, and for what it actually ended up doing to my life, which is taking 5 years away from me, making me becoming an addict for 5 years. And so I went home with those Percocets, those painkillers, and at first I just took them normally as prescribed, like the bottle said, and it got rid of the, it really helped with the pain, which was pretty bad. But in addition to that, after just taking a couple days worth of those pills, it became all I could think about. All I thought about was the next time I got to take it, and something just clicked, something changed. But I wasn't really aware of it because, it was happening from within inside myself, like my own outlook. And all of a sudden I became obsessed with it. And it didn't take long for maybe like a week or two before I started taking a lot more than I should have been taking. And, didn't wait the full 4 or 6 hours to take the next dose. Yeah, one pill eventually turned into a really severe opioid addiction, which just escalated and escalated. As it escalated, I traded in those things that were important to me. So eventually I was so ashamed that I had that problem. I had dropped out of medical school to continue to use stronger versions of those opioids and more intense routes of administration. And my friends got worried, my family got worried. They were reaching out. They knew something was wrong. They didn't know exactly what, but I hid that from them. It was a secret. And to protect my addiction, I started to isolate myself, and I stopped answering phone calls from my friends and started to surround myself by other people that were using to make it feel like more normal and more like it was an okay thing to be doing, which it wasn't. And we just, we enabled ourselves, each other, to keep using. And like this Narcan thing, I've had to use it before. I've had to bring friends and my ex-girlfriend back to life from opioid overdoses. So it's a really amazing thing to have, and it's great to be aware of that, that's out there. So fast forward 5 years, I finally hit what I would call my rock bottom, and I was caught with a large amount of opiates, and I got arrested. So this happened, and I'm actually very grateful that it did, because it catalyzed my recovery. And I got the opportunity to get into recovery and treatment and get better. So another really important part of my story I wanted to emphasize is that if it does happen, it's not, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and you can get better. Because now I've been clean for about 2 years. Like it'll be 2 years next month. And I really feel like I'm myself again, and I've been able to get my life back. So just knowing that that's possible, I think is really important, because hopefully it doesn't happen to anybody, but to know that if I had reached out earlier, asked for help earlier, maybe I would have not had to lose so much time or had so many negative consequences from it. So if for some reason, if somebody ever has to deal with this, ask for help early. And, I know it's, for me, I was so ashamed of that I had lost control, that I didn't want to reach out, but that's just such an important thing to be able to ask for help. And if someone maybe has a problem, or you suspect there's a problem, talk to them, initiate that conversation, because maybe they don't want to. And if there's nothing you personally can do, or sometimes it's very hard to convince someone to get help, tell someone else, tell family members, tell close friends. The more support they have, the more likely they would be probably to get into recovery and get better from that. So yeah, that's basically it. I wish that if in high school I had someone come and share their personal story with me, so that I had a better understanding of that word and what it really meant to be addicted and what addiction really was. So just my hope is that you guys got something from that, and that now you have kind of you heard me, you know me, you have maybe more of a personal connection to it now, and it's more real, to be more vigilant about getting prescription medications, especially in normal contexts, like if you had surgery and you have pain, to really think about what the potential is for these drugs to do mentally and physically to you. So that's about it. And thank you guys for having me, and thank you, April.
Well, thank you, Nick. And I just want to add on to that, there will be occasions where we just don't have a choice. These medications, painkillers, are the most helpful when it comes to acute or really severe pain. Without them, we'd be in big trouble just dealing, on a daily basis with pain levels that we have. And so I don't want to dissuade people from using them, but what I would say is that if you ever do absolutely need to be prescribed these medications, come off of them as quickly as you can. Even go so far as to give a family member or friend, whoever you're surrounded by, responsibility for doling them out. Because like Nick, once he had them and they're in his possession and he's, already in their grasp per se, there's no holding back. So just minimize. And that's true again for any of these medications. If you need them, just use them for the shortest time you possibly can, and you will hopefully be just fine. So
yeah, I just wanted to say real quick, what you're saying is totally true. Like, what increases the chance of this addiction thing happening is exposure, so frequency. Mm-hmm. The more you're exposed, your body's exposed to it, the more chance you have of developing it, even if with no risk factors. And Paul actually asked the question, how I got opioids after my prescription ran out. Mm-hmm. Well, right after it ran out, I found that you could get them on the internet. So learning that kind of set me up for the slippery slope of getting worse and worse into my addiction. And I also eventually found other people that used, and through them, found other ways to get them.
Well, and I would just want to add on to what you just said about the internet. Once again, back, and we're talking probably 7 years ago now, Nick, when you were getting them on the internet. Back then, you weren't seeing fentanyl as much as you are now in online prescription, businesses per se. You know what I mean? So your risk was probably far less than it would be today if you were ordering opioids on the internet, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And I've read those news stories about the people pill pressing fentanyl, fake oxycontins and stuff to give to people, and just overdoses happening everywhere because of it's so difficult to actually mix it uniformly that you could
Yeah.
get a pill that has just 10,000 times the strength of one normal pill. So.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to say just before I move to my last slide here is that stigma plays a big, big role in whether people ask for treatment. You know, Nick, I could tell from your story that stigma, feeling ashamed because you had, you know, developed a substance use disorder, it kept you from asking for help. You know, here you were, a med student, and with your dream of becoming a doctor, and you know, that was what your family and friends were expecting of you. And to have to admit that you had an addiction that had set in had to be really, really difficult because of that stigma. So do you have any words of wisdom regarding stigma and how all of us can help knock that down?
Well, I mean, it's hard for an individual to address the stigma thing because a lot of it comes from the media and how it's portrayed. I mean, you see all kinds of stories on the news about people with addiction problems and how it's messing their lives up, celebrities that have lost control and stuff like that. But you don't really see many like positive stories like, oh, look, this person conquered their addiction, they're in recovery now and they're doing so well, and they actually went from being here in their addiction to doing so well that they're doing this now and they have a PhD and whatever. I think sharing more of those stories, like getting through it, and then the good things that happen afterwards, that it's possible to overcome, and those things I think are important to like, instead of, I mean, it's important to warn people and sort of scare people a little bit, but I think it's also just as important to show that it's, you know, it's not, it first of all doesn't mean that the person had a moral failing. It's not like just this hedonistic person that's obsessed with feeling good. It's much more complicated than that. To be educated about that, and that, you know, it does cause you. I mean, it becomes your priority, so it can change your behavior. But it doesn't mean that an addict is a criminal or that an addict, you know, lies all the time. These like stigma of those negative attributes, and losing control just in general is so, it's just, I felt so ashamed that I had lost control. Like I felt like it was my responsibility, myself, to make myself better, and I didn't want to admit myself even that I was out of control, that the drug was actually in control. So yeah.
I think having people understand that it is a recognized brain, you know, it's a disease, the disease of addiction per se, helps, I think, understand that your brain's been hijacked in a sense. You know, these chemicals have hijacked it, and it's not because you're a bad person that you're acting as addicts do. You're robbing a pharmacy or this or that. You are compelled to do these things to support this habit, and it's something that you have to really struggle hard with to move away from, but it is possible, as you said. Okay, well, we're running out of time here, so I want to move over to the next slide, which, yeah, once it sits here for a bit, it doesn't want to move, but let me try again. Well, that doesn't look like it wants to move, but what I want to say is that we have, just like Ankita has come on board to be with us as an intern, I want to offer this opportunity for any of your classmates to join us as an intern. Here we go, finally. So these are ways that you can personally get involved. The internships, we'd like to have somebody commit to for a year. Ideally, we have people in freshman year come on board and stay with us all 4 years of high school. And, you know, because we have, I think we have 5 or 6 interns now, we come together just, you know, every 2 weeks on a conference call basis. We talk about the various projects that we have going on and develop new ones to work on that can be done either individually or collectively. And so, Ankita, is there anything else you'd want to share about being an intern, why you would suggest people consider doing this?
Well, I think at least when you came to my school my freshman year, kind of helped me realize like kind of how big of a problem it really was, especially one on like a national scale and then more on a local level too.
Mm-hmm.
And already being an advocate for substance abuse disorders with tobacco and marijuana, this was also something that I was really interested in, and I wanted to be an intern to help, just to kind of help people and to kind of raise awareness about the issue.
And I would say your voices, youth voices are just so powerful. You know, parents listen. You give parents a window of opportunity to understand their children better. And, you know, kids are going to, you know, listen to kids better than adults. So again, I just highly encourage you to consider this. It looks great on your college apps, your job applications. And, you know, I have given countless numbers of, you know, references to and written, you know, glowing recommendations, et cetera, for previous interns. So it's a good thing to do if you have time. And then I just also want to mention that we do have currently an art contest in the works. And so high school students from both Alameda and Contra Costa counties are encouraged to submit artwork that speaks to what is your natural high, what, you know, what makes you get up in the morning and want to, you know, enjoy your day, and, you know, what do you want to strive towards accomplishing, et cetera, your goals in life. So, Paul, I think I provided you with a copy of the flyer, didn't I? Electronic copy?
Yes, yes. Hey, I was going to mention that the students are asking some really good questions in the chat, so I'm hoping you guys can take a peek at some of those and maybe answer a few of those.
Yeah, I'm going to stop the share so I can actually see them. Let me go to the chat here. All right, so
so one of the questions was about doctors over prescribing to drug seekers, and are doctors ever getting in trouble?
Yeah, interesting question, and it pertains to my own son's situation. So my son went to a doctor, he got prescribed medications that he died from 9 days later. That doctor actually ran a pill mill, meaning that she was indiscriminately giving out prescriptions, very high doses and quantities, to people who would come to see her. That doctor did get in trouble. Bottom line is, she was ultimately, about 6 years after Joey died, she was arrested and convicted of 3 counts of second-degree murder, Joey being one of them. And there were another 20 felony, like illegal prescribing charges that landed her in a 30-year to life sentence. So she's serving 30 years to life in prison, and she won't get out. She's not even eligible for parole for another 20 years, let's just say, at this point. So yes, it does happen. There are some really bad doctors out there. They're few and far between. There aren't many. But that particular doctor, just one single doctor that's overprescribing as she was doing, can take the lives of who knows how many people. I'm sure the 8 young men that were part of the trial that she, you know, that died under her watch are just a fraction of the impact that she's had. So yeah, it happens. And the Drug Enforcement Administration is the federal agency that is in charge of watching over doctors and making sure that they prescribe appropriately. They take action when they aren't.
If any of you know, one of the questions was if you're prescribed one of these opioids and you don't, I think if you don't finish them, what are you supposed to do with them?
Oh, I love that question. You need to get rid of them, and please do not throw them in the toilet. What you want to do is take them either to, in our case, the San Ramon or Danville or Alamo, or even the Dublin police departments have bins. You just walk in, put everything in a baggie before you go, and then just drop them in the bin. There's no signing in or anything. It's completely anonymous. Otherwise, the CVSs, every CVS pharmacy in our county has a bin also, same situation. So you can go drop them off there, or any of the Kaiser facilities too. So you want to get rid of them. It's really important we get them out of the medicine cabinet. And in fact, go home tonight, look in your medicine cabinet, see what you've got. You know, go with your parents, help educate them, because chances are you now know more than they do. Let them know where they need to go to get rid of medications. If they're expired, and I check my medicine now and then, even cold medicine, it's interesting how quickly some of this stuff can expire, and it just sits there forever. It doesn't mean it's dead. That medication can still be potent. Sometimes it grows more potent with age, even after the expiration date. So just get rid of it. Don't put it in the trash. Don't throw it in the toilet. Take it down to a normal facility and they'll incinerate it.
Hey, this one would be good for Nick. A question came in regarding, recovery and after years of recovery, are people that recovered, are they in danger of a relapse, or are you just recovered?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think there's always a danger of relapse. What people in recovery kind of say is that you're sort of in remission from your addiction once you get into recovery. So it's not gone. And cravings and stuff like that definitely get better, and there's less of them. But it hasn't happened to me, and hopefully it never does. But I've known people in recovery and heard stories about how it only took like one slip to like go back into a full-blown addiction. And so it's constantly, it's a danger, but it's something that can be mitigated by choosing the right people to surround yourself with. And then for me, I always, like, this helps me a lot to be able to come and tell my story and sort of remember all the negative things that happened and how I sacrificed and traded in all these important things to me to use drugs, and keeping that fresh, just like that memory of how it wasn't all good, and actually most of it wasn't good, helps me to kind of stay strong in that recovery, and to help make sure that doesn't happen to me.
Yeah, I want to just tag onto that just a little bit, and that would be that people who have had an addiction problem in the past also need to make sure their doctors know, and if you were to have surgery, Nick, what would you do for pain management? Because what if they gave you a prescription of, painkillers to deal with the after surgery pain? You probably would want to find another alternative at all.
Yeah, I would probably try everything possible to not exposed to that chemical again. And there are alternatives, and often there's just kind of this like, you feel entitled to painkillers usually, or I did when I had my surgery, but sometimes it's not necessary, and the pain doesn't last that long. There's things like breathing meditation, yoga, just there's other alternatives, and sometimes just ibuprofen or something over the counter that's not addictive is so.
Yeah, studies have actually shown that a combination of Tylenol and, say, Advil, ibuprofen and acetaminophen, can be just as potent and okay. The other thing I'd want to just give everybody a heads up, we haven't talked about the dentist and the inevitable fact that most of us will have our wisdom teeth removed. And often, at least in the past, it's like, here's your Vicodin, here's your Norco. They have prescribed painkillers for after oral surgery too. So be really mindful of that. Joey actually had all 4 of his removed oral surgery. He was prescribed Vicodin, but never took it. I gave him Advil instead. He was totally good. I recently had a tooth pulled, Advil, no problem. So we can get through even oral surgery like that without having these strong painkillers. And thankfully, our oral surgeon here that I used, and Joey did too, same doctor, has completely moved away from even prescribing opioids after oral surgery unless there's extenuating circumstances. But a really good thing to remember there too.
Maybe we'll answer this last question, then we can wrap it up. We had a question. It's, how do you know when you're addicted?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I didn't realize it for quite a while. It kind of was just like, I thought I wanted to keep doing it. And there's an important distinction to make too between being addicted and physically dependent. So becoming physically dependent on a drug is like that you have a physical withdrawal to it. So you can become physically dependent to caffeine. If you stop drinking coffee, you can get those headaches. For opioids, it's pretty bad if you stop taking them. You might not be addicted psychologically, but you can stop taking them and basically feel like you have the worst flu of your life. The withdrawals are pretty bad. But the psychological component is, for me, like looking back in hindsight, when I could have realized I was addicted, but I guess I wasn't educated enough to spot it, is that after using it, it was like I thought about it all the time, and looked forward to the next time I could use it, or would eventually try and, you know, by any means get more to use. I've heard people say also that it's like it's an obsession. It starts feeling like an obsession, and I guess if you start, I started to prioritize it over things that were much more important to me before, like friends, family, school, all those things. But it, you know, it can be pretty difficult to realize it's happening to you, and it was for me, until some really negative consequences start happening. So I think just the most important thing is to really just pay attention and be very careful.
I think that's why it's really important for friends. You know, like if you notice, if you have a friend who you think is getting into trouble with this stuff, that person may not realize that they've got the problem. They're making excuses, or they're in denial. Basically, they need to hear from you. You may be that sanity point that can help them understand that, hey, wait a minute, maybe, you know, maybe I do have a problem. So the sooner we're willing to speak up and, you know, call our friends or family members out, the better for them. We can hopefully, you know, get them into some kind of support and treatment that will, you know, make a difference in their lives before they go down the path too far. So the earlier the better in that regard, right?
Yeah, definitely. The denial factor is a very powerful one. I was in a very profound denial for quite a while. So
I've heard that from a lot of people
hard
that
to
have
overcome
developed
that
a
yourself. You
disorder.
definitely need outside help.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Paul?
I think, well, obviously at this time, if we were in the classroom, we'd give you guys a big round of applause, but I just want to say on behalf of my class, we really appreciate you taking the time to give us all this great information.
Oh, you're so welcome. I hope it makes a difference. And again, if anybody is interested in an internship, Paul, you know how to reach me.
Yeah.
Talk to your teacher and he'll connect with me. Or perhaps you took a screenshot of our contact information. You're welcome to connect with me directly too if you want to. So anyway, thank you all. I wish I could see your faces, and
Yeah.
it's a little different way of presenting, but I do appreciate the opportunity for us to share our information. We really feel it's life-saving, potentially life-saving, and something you can take with you from now through the rest of your life. These medications are not going away. They're going to be with us forever. So thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
All right. Take care. I'm going to sign us off now.
Okay.